President Bush's version of the war on terror and his alliance with Pakistan's General Pervez Musharraf was already wrought with fault lines. Today, we have all felt the earthquake. In our fourth story on the countdown, the assassination of opposition leader Benazir Bhutto and the other consequences of where the Bush administration has placed its faith, along with its investment of at least $5 billion of our money. No specific word from the president on whether Pakistan's elections should go ahead as scheduled 12 days from now, though the president said the people of Pakistan should continue with, quote, the democratic process for which Bhutto so bravely fought. And as we've shown you previously in this news hour, the president punctuated his comments with references to, quote, murderous extremists and the, quote, struggle against the forces of terror and extremism, as if the source of Bhutto's assassination were absolutely clear and proved. And Mr. Bush has cited Pakistani's democracy as if that had truly existed even before the assassination. The president did speak with General Musharraf for about 10 minutes today, a senior administration official telling NBC News that Musharraf appears to be making the right moves. And he is not talking about canceling nor postponing elections or reimposing a state of emergency. A reality check on that presently. And when a White House spokesman in Crawford, Texas, Scott Stanzel, was asked if President Bush still has confidence in Musharraf, that spokesman offered a rather underwhelming response. Quote, we're willing to work with him. Let's turn now to Newsweek magazine. Senior White House correspondent, MSNBC political analyst Richard Wolffe. Richard, good evening.
Good evening, Keith.
Underlying the administration's alliance with Musharraf is that assumption that, on balance, he is on the good side in the war on terror. But Musharraf just failed really 3 huge tests at once. Basically, first he suspended the democracy. Even with that kind of control, power, at best he couldn't protect a leading politician, a leading statesperson of his society from assassination. And thirdly, now, unless he makes some unexpected and very statesman-like decisions, he is going to benefit politically from that assassination. How can President Bush possibly continue to support this man in the name of this country?
Well, Musharraf has clearly tested Bush's patience to its limits, but the president still is uncomfortable in saying that. If you look at the boilerplate language that he used today in his statement, President Bush didn't talk about terrorists, he talked about extremists. That itself, within the Kremlinology confines of the White House, is a significant thing. And he also talked about people who are undermining democracy in Pakistan, and that could also easily refer to Musharraf just as much as it could to al-Qaeda. But more broadly, Musharraf has really tested the 2 premises of the 2 Bush terms. If the first term was about terrorism, then the second term was really all about democracy, at least according to the highfalutin language of that second inaugural. And Musharraf has failed both of those tests. So really, the time has come for the straight-talking president to speak clearly.
As we mentioned, $5 billion in aid to that government from this country to fight the Taliban, to fight al-Qaeda, and yet Bush administration officials were telling the New York Times on Monday, flying under the radar over the Christmas break, much of the American money was not making its way to frontline Pakistani units. Is this, you know, he's still the only option there argument beginning to wear thin even in the White House? Do they have a plan B?
Well, Bhutto was the plan B, and actually she told me shortly before she went back to Pakistan that she felt that Musharraf had really pulled the wool over the administration's eyes in many ways. And most importantly, you still hear the White House saying this, that Musharraf was targeted by terrorists and therefore he was the only thing that stood between Pakistan's nukes and al-Qaeda. And in fact, Bhutto said there was only a single-digit support for Islamists in Pakistan. There was this mainstream, broad-based support for non-theocratic parties such as her own, and that they needed to be given a chance. And now when it comes to the money side of things, look, beyond Musharraf, there is a bigger issue that this administration really hasn't put effort into dealing with, and that's the relationship between India and Pakistan, 2 American allies that are no closer now than they were before 9/11.
What flexibility does President Bush have, depending on what Musharraf does next? Can he influence the decision on the parliamentary elections on the 8th? What does he do to stop postponement?
Well, he can influence them, and he has. There was a lot of behind-the-scenes effort to get Musharraf to restore the Constitution, obviously once he got his own political stratagem in order. But they can. I mean, the money is the biggest leverage of all, and Musharraf needs the president's support, even though he is, unfortunately, playing both sides in the war on terror.
Does this complete a kind of awful trifecta, Richard, of how this administration will be judged historically when it comes to a country's relationship on the war on terror. We had the right idea in Afghanistan, and we left the field early. We got it completely wrong in Iraq, and now we have obviously sided with the wrong people under the wrong circumstances with the wrong results in Pakistan.
You know, I'd pull Afghanistan out of those three in the sense that there has been some progress made. The Afghan National Army is a good institution, but what this shows, especially with regard to Afghanistan, is that one assassination attempt on Karzai, one successful attempt, and the country that has made progress can be easily destabilized. But look, Pakistan was and still is a case of instability that this administration hasn't come to terms with.
Our own Richard Wolffe, senior White House correspondent at Newsweek magazine. As always, great thanks for your time tonight, Richard.
Thank you, Keith.